This is Rick Prokop at Piano Power Lessons. Today we're going to continue on with the next 8 bars from here to here, which are very interesting harmonically. So this is the section that sounds like this. And what you may not realize from listening is that from this point, a modulation is occurring that brings you to the key of G sharp minor. So I'm just going to write in G sharp up here. And then it's followed by G sharp minor's 5 chord, which is a D sharp 7th. Hence, you have D sharp, F double sharp, A sharp, and C sharp. So this is D sharp 7th. There's the F double sharp there. And then the D sharp 7th resolves back to a G sharp tonality here, but he does a switcheroo and makes it a G sharp 7th so that he can get back to C sharp minor, G sharp 7th being 5 of C sharp minor. So it's pretty elaborate. And along the way from here, he arrives at a tonality with a B major in it, a B, D sharp, F sharp. He arrives at another tonality or chord, E major. And on the third beat, he arrives at a C sharp minor 6th, which is C sharp, E, G sharp, and A sharp. Okay, so I'm writing that in. And those tonalities sound like this. And then we go to a B, and then we go to an E, and then we go to a C sharp minor 6th. And the reason that I'm stressing these tonalities is that all 4 of these chords are common to both the key of G sharp minor and the key of C sharp minor. So in terms of C sharp minor, this is 1, this is the 7 chord, this is the 3 chord, and this is the 1 chord again. In terms of G sharp minor, this is the 4 chord, this is the 3 chord, this is the 6 chord, and the 4 chord again with a 6th added. So if you've ever studied classical harmony, this point right here in the song is considered a pivot point. It's a point in the song where the composer can freely go to another key because this particular chord is present in both of those keys. It just turns out by the luck of the draw that these other 2 major triads are also in both of the keys, but that's how a pivot chord works. So up until this point, we'd be analyzing everything in terms of C sharp. Well, here we'd go C sharp minor, then we'd analyze in terms of A, and then we come back to C sharp minor, and at this point is where that transition occurs, and we say at this point now we're analyzing in terms of G sharp minor. And the transition to another key usually has to be validated by a strong cadence in that key. So here we have G sharp minor, we have its 5 chord, and then we go back to G sharp. So that's a strong cadence. So clearly we can analyze all of this in terms of G sharp minor. Now to spice it up a bit, getting from C sharp minor to B, Chopin throws in B's 5 chord, which is an F sharp 7th. So we have C sharp minor, we have F sharp 7th, which would normally go to a B major. But Chopin, being the colorful person that he is, also spices up the B chord. And he adds a 7th. So we have B, D sharp, F sharp, A for a B 7th, and then makes it even more colorful by putting the 9th, the C sharp, on top. And now the B, which is normally a stable chord, becomes an unstable chord because it's a 7th chord. So now we have this. So it looked like we were going to have a 2-5-1 progression going to G sharp minor's 3 chord. But then by changing this to B 9th and making it unstable, the B 9th becomes the 5 chord of E, which is a stable chord in this progression. And E, just to remind you, is the 6th chord in the key of G sharp minor. So now we have this. And finally, we get something that sounds stable. Here you're stable when you come off of this. That's stable, but now 7th chord, another 7th chord, and stability again. Well, now we have to move from E to G sharp minor, which is going to require some unstable chords that provide the impetus for us to get to this G sharp minor. So we have E here, and now it's becoming a little more unstable, and then with the introduction of this C double sharp, it's really unstable. And this chord is called a French 6th. And for those of you who have studied classical harmony, there's a German 6th and a French 6th. And this resolves like this. And I'm sure you've heard that many times in the past. And then a resolution like that. And that's exactly what Chopin is doing here. So in order to see how a French 6 operates, we're going to go down to the keyboard and we're going to work on it in the key of A minor because it's all white keys and it's much easier for you to grasp. And then we'll bring that progression down into the key of G sharp minor, and then it'll all make sense to you. So in terms of A minor, instead of having an E here, we're going to have an F major. Instead of having a C sharp minor 6, we're going to have a D minor 6. Instead of having a G sharp minor, we're going to have an A minor. Instead of a D sharp 7th, we're going to have an E 7th. And instead of a G sharp 7th, we're going to have an A 7th, which will bring us back to D minor, which is a half step above C sharp minor. So just to be clear, the notes of this interesting French 6 chord are the A sharp, the E, the G sharp, and the C double sharp. And that chord sounds like this. Okay? And then it resolves to G sharp minor. Now, what's termed the German 6 in classical analysis in the key of A minor would look like an F 7th. And the French 6 would look like an F 7th with a flat 5. So Instead of F, A, C, E flat, we now have F, A, C flat, E flat. And also note that both the German and the French appear 1/2 step above the 5 chord of any key. And it could be a major key or a minor key. So in popular music, the use of this chord, a 1/2 step above the 5 chord, going to the 5 chord, is used a lot. Let me demonstrate. And if you're wondering what that song is called, it's St. James Infirmary, and it was recorded by Louis Armstrong in the late 1920s. Well, let's get back to why this chord is called a 6th chord and not a 7th chord. When you study classical harmony or counterpoint, as most of the great composers did, one of the first rules of counterpoint is you shouldn't have what are called parallel fifths in your writing. So this is a no-no because of that. So how did they get around this? Well, what they did is they delayed the arrival of the 5 chord by first going to the 1/64 chord. And then playing the 5 chord. And then finishing the song out. Now, 1/64, if you don't know, is the secret code for a second inversion triad. So we have an interval of a 6th and an interval of a 4th. It's called a 1/64 chord when you're studying counterpoint. Now, if we were in a minor key like this Chopin Waltz, we would use a French 6th. So instead of this chord, we would flat the 5, we'd have a C flat, and then this chord would resolve like that to A minor in second inversion, and then we'd have our 5 chord, and then the 1 chord. So why are both of these chords described as German 6th, French 6th, when they apparently look like 7th chords? And it's due to the fact that the outer interval is resolving outwardly. Normally, if we have an E flat on top, it resolves downward to a D. If we have a D sharp on top, though, it resolves upward a 1/2 step to an E. And that's your answer. So the interval of a minor 7th, F to E flat, is replaced by the interval of an augmented 6th, F to D sharp, resolving outward. So let's get back to the Chopin harmonies transposed up a 1/2 step to A minor. First, I'd like you to play the 4 chord, D minor, and then add a 6th to it, just so you know what that is. So that's called D minor 6th. And its first inversion is here. Okay, so practice that first. D, F, A, B, then F, A, B, D. So transposed up a 1/2 step, Chopin begins on an F major, goes to the first inversion of the 4 chord, D minor 6th. Starting to look familiar now? Now I'm going to raise this D to a D sharp. And there's my French 6th. And how does he resolve it? Okay. Now from that point, he goes to the 5 chord of A, of A minor, that is. And then, instead of going to A minor, he does this. He goes to an A7th, which is 5 of D minor. So let's go through that whole thing again together. F, D minor 6th, our French 6th, resolving to the 1-6-4 chord, A minor, A minor's 5 chord, E7th, then D minor's 5 chord, A7th, and then D minor. All right, let's move the whole thing down a half step to the key of G sharp minor now. So the chord you need to understand in G sharp minor is 1, 2, 3, the 4 chords, C sharp minor with a 6th. That's called C sharp minor 6th, and its first inversion is E, G sharp, A sharp, C sharp. So now Chopin takes us from E major to the first inversion of C sharp minor 6th to the French 6th. Right, here's E7th with a flat 5, right? French 6th, and then resolving out to G sharp minor, and then followed by G sharp minor's 5 chord, which is D sharp 7th, and we expect that to cadence on a G sharp minor, but Chopin fools us and instead brings us to G sharp 7th, which is the 5 chord of the key that we're in, C sharp minor. That's the key of this waltz. That's the 1 chord, and he's back to C sharp minor. So let's try that whole thing again. E, C sharp minor 6th, the French 6th, the 1-6-4 chord, that chord's 5 chord, and then G sharp 7th, second inversion, and then C sharp minor. And within the actual piece, here's his voicing for that French 6th. Instead of this, he just takes this A sharp and puts it down here so that we have this. So we have, see, there it is. And then we have, okay? And then we have, here's the D, here's the D sharp 7th, and all this chromatic motion. The D sharp 7th is in the left hand, and this is all chromatic motion around that chord. And then we have the G sharp 7th. Bringing us back to the 1 chord C sharp minor. So I hope that information was useful to you. In the next lesson, we'll tackle how to play these 8 bars. And I hope to see you next time.